The desert sun blazed overhead as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez approached the checkpoint at Forward Operating Base Thunder. Her combat boots crunched against the gravel as she walked toward the military police station, carrying a stack of personnel files that needed urgent processing. The base hummed with activity as soldiers prepared for another convoy mission into the volatile region of eastern Afghanistan. Maria had been serving in the army for 8 years, working her way up from a fresh-faced recruit to a respected non-commissioned officer. Her specialty was logistics coordination, ensuring that supplies, equipment, and personnel moved efficiently across the challenging terrain of the war zone. She had earned her stripes through countless hours of meticulous planning and flawless execution of complex operations. The MP checkpoint stood like a fortress gate, with concrete barriers and razor wire creating a secure perimeter. 2 young military police officers, Corporal Jenkins and Private First Class Thompson, manned the station. They were relatively new to the deployment, having arrived just 3 weeks earlier as part of a rotation from Fort Bragg. Their inexperience showed in the way they scrutinized every document with excessive caution. As Maria approached, she noticed the tension in the air. Intelligence reports had indicated increased insurgent activity in the area, and everyone was on high alert. The base commander had issued strict orders about security protocols, emphasizing that no exceptions would be made for anyone, regardless of rank or familiarity. "Good afternoon," Maria said, presenting her identification card and the stack of files. "I need to process these convoy manifests for tomorrow's mission." Corporal Jenkins took her military ID and examined it closely under the bright fluorescent light. Something about his expression made Maria uneasy. He turned the card over several times, comparing the photograph to her face with unusual intensity. Private Thompson leaned in, also studying the identification with furrowed brows. "Ma'am, there seems to be an issue with your ID," Jenkins said, his voice carrying a note of suspicion. "The security features don't look right to us." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had been using the same military identification for over 2 years without any problems. The card had been issued when she received her promotion to staff sergeant, and she had used it countless times to access secure areas, process classified documents, and authorize supply transfers. "What kind of issue?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is my standard military identification, issued by Personnel Command." Thompson stepped forward, holding a magnifying glass over the ID card. "The holographic strip here looks different from what we've been seeing. And this serial number format doesn't match our reference guide." Maria felt a wave of frustration mixed with concern. She knew her identification was legitimate, but she also understood the MPs were following protocol. In a combat zone, security couldn't be taken lightly. False identification had been used by enemy infiltrators in other theaters of operation, making verification procedures critical for base safety. "I assure you, that ID is completely legitimate," Maria said firmly. "I've been stationed here for 6 months, and I've never had any problems with verification before." Jenkins and Thompson exchanged glances. They had been briefed about sophisticated forgery techniques used by hostile forces, and their training emphasized erring on the side of caution. The base had recently received intelligence warnings about potential infiltration attempts, making them especially vigilant. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step aside while we verify this with our supervisor," Jenkins said, gesturing toward a small waiting area beside the checkpoint. "Standard procedure for any questionable documentation." Maria complied, though her mind raced with concern about the convoy manifests. The mission was scheduled to depart early the next morning, and any delay in processing could jeopardize the entire operation. Dozens of soldiers were counting on those supplies reaching their forward positions before nightfall. The waiting area consisted of a few metal folding chairs under a camouflaged canopy. Maria sat down, watching as more soldiers approached the checkpoint for their own business. Each interaction reminded her of the routine nature of these verifications and how unusual her situation had become. 20 minutes passed before Sergeant First Class Williams, the MP's supervisor, emerged from the main station. He was a veteran soldier with 15 years of service, known for his thorough approach to security procedures. His weathered face showed the strain of multiple deployments as he approached Maria with her identification card in hand. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I've been reviewing your identification with my team," Williams said, his tone professional but concerned. "We're seeing some inconsistencies that require additional verification." "What kind of inconsistencies?" Maria asked, standing to face him directly. "I need to get these convoy manifests processed today." Williams showed her the ID card, pointing to specific security features. "The microprinting here appears degraded, and the magnetic strip isn't reading properly in our scanner. These could be signs of tampering or forgery." Maria examined her own ID more closely than she had in months. The card did show signs of wear from constant use in harsh desert conditions. The edges were slightly frayed, and the surface had accumulated scratches from being inserted into various card readers and scanners throughout the base. "This wear is from normal use," she explained. "I've been carrying this card every day for 2 years through multiple deployments. The desert environment is tough on equipment." "I understand that, but we have protocols to follow," Williams replied. "I'm going to need to contact Personnel Command for verification of your identity and status. This could take several hours." The implications hit Maria immediately. Several hours of delay would mean missing the deadline for convoy preparation. The mission would have to be postponed, potentially putting soldiers in forward positions at risk due to supply shortages. She had built her reputation on reliability and efficiency, and this situation threatened both. "Sergeant Williams, I have critical mission documents that need processing today," she pressed. "Can we expedite this verification somehow?" Williams shook his head. "Security protocols don't allow for expedited processing when there are questions about identification validity. I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait." As Maria returned to the waiting area, she noticed other soldiers glancing in her direction. Word was beginning to spread about the situation, and she could feel the weight of their curious stares. In the close-knit environment of a forward operating base, unusual incidents became common knowledge quickly. The afternoon heat grew more oppressive as she waited. The metal chair became uncomfortable, and sweat began to soak through her uniform despite the shade provided by the canopy. She checked her watch repeatedly, calculating how much time remained before the convoy preparation window closed completely. An hour passed with no update from the MPs. Maria watched as regular base operations continued around her, supply trucks rolling through the checkpoint, soldiers reporting for duty shifts, and maintenance crews working on vehicles. The normalcy of these activities contrasted sharply with her increasingly desperate situation. Finally, she decided to take action. Standing up from the chair, she approached the MP station again, hoping to get an update on the verification process. Corporal Jenkins looked up as she approached, his expression unchanged from earlier. "Any word on the verification?" she asked, trying to keep frustration out of her voice. "Still waiting for response from Personnel Command," Jenkins replied. "These things take time, especially when we're dealing with potential security issues." Maria felt her patience wearing thin. She had dedicated years of her life to serving her country with distinction, earning commendations for her work and the respect of her peers. Being treated as a potential security threat felt both insulting and surreal. As she prepared to return to the waiting area once more, the sound of approaching vehicles caught her attention. A convoy of black SUVs was heading toward the checkpoint, moving with the purposeful speed that indicated high-ranking personnel. The lead vehicle bore the distinctive flags and markings of general officer transportation. The convoy came to a stop at the checkpoint, and Maria watched as Sergeant Williams snapped to attention. The MPs quickly formed a respectful formation as the rear door of the lead SUV opened. A tall figure in combat fatigues emerged, and Maria immediately recognized the 3 stars on his collar. Lieutenant General Harrison stepped out of the vehicle with the bearing of a career military officer. He was known throughout the theater of operations for his hands-on leadership style and personal involvement in critical missions. His presence at the checkpoint was unusual and commanded immediate attention from everyone in the vicinity. "What's the situation here, Sergeant?" General Harrison asked Williams, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command. Williams quickly explained the identification verification issue, presenting Maria's ID card for the general's review. As he spoke, Maria felt a mixture of hope and apprehension about how this unexpected development might affect her situation. General Harrison listened intently to the explanation, occasionally nodding as Williams detailed the security concerns that had prompted the extended verification process. When the sergeant finished his report, the general took the ID card and examined it himself with the practiced eye of someone familiar with military documentation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the general called out, motioning for her to approach. Step forward, please. Maria walked toward the general with military bearing, despite the uncertainty of her situation. She stood at attention as he continued to examine her identification card, comparing it with her physical appearance and demeanor. You're the logistics coordinator who's been handling the supply operations for Sector 7, correct? General Harrison asked, looking directly at her. Yes, sir, Maria responded, surprised that he was familiar with her work. The general nodded slowly, then turned back to Sergeant Williams. This identification is legitimate. I've worked with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez on multiple operations, and her documentation is in order. Relief flooded through Maria as the general's words cleared her of any suspicion. The MPs immediately returned to their professional demeanor, though she could see embarrassment in their expressions about the extended questioning. However, General Harrison continued, there's been a change in today's mission parameters that affects your role, Staff Sergeant. The unexpected continuation of the conversation caught Maria off guard. She had assumed the general's intervention was simply to resolve the identification issue, but his tone suggested something more significant was developing. Sir? She responded, waiting for clarification. General Harrison handed her ID back to her, then gestured toward his convoy vehicles. I need you to grab your gear and report to Convoy Command immediately. There's been a critical development that requires your immediate attention and expertise. The abrupt shift from being questioned about her identity to receiving direct orders from a 3-star general left Maria momentarily stunned. The other soldiers at the checkpoint watched the exchange with obvious interest, recognizing they were witnessing an unusual turn of events. What kind of development, sir? She asked, professional training overriding her surprise. Intelligence indicates that the supply route we've been using has been compromised, the general explained. We need someone with your logistical expertise to plan and lead an alternative convoy route immediately. The mission timeline has been accelerated due to the threat level. Maria's mind immediately shifted into operational mode. Route planning under threat conditions required extensive knowledge of terrain, enemy capabilities, and supply requirements. It was exactly the kind of challenge that had defined her career, but the urgency suggested complications beyond normal planning parameters. How much time do we have for route analysis and preparation? She asked. 2 hours, General Harrison replied grimly. The forward units need those supplies before dark, and we can't afford to wait for the standard planning cycle. The impossibility of the timeline hit Maria immediately. Proper route planning typically required days of intelligence analysis, terrain assessment, and coordination with multiple units. Attempting to complete such planning in 2 hours while ensuring convoy safety would push every resource to its limit. Sir, that timeline is extremely challenging given the complexity of route planning in hostile territory, she said honestly. General Harrison's expression showed he understood the difficulties involved. I wouldn't ask if we had alternatives, Staff Sergeant. Your reputation for solving impossible logistics problems is why you're being assigned to this mission. As Maria processed the magnitude of what was being asked of her, she realized that the identification questioning that had seemed so problematic minutes earlier now appeared trivial compared to the responsibility being placed on her shoulders. The stakes had escalated dramatically from processing routine paperwork to leading a critical convoy through hostile territory. The general's aide approached and handed Maria a tactical folder containing preliminary intelligence reports and route options. The thickness of the documentation indicated the complexity of the situation she was about to inherit. The convoy staging area is at Building 47, General Harrison instructed. Major Chin will brief you on the specific requirements and available resources. Time is critical, so move immediately. Yes, sir, Maria responded, taking the folder and preparing to leave the checkpoint that had held her captive for the past several hours. As she walked toward the convoy staging area, Maria reflected on the dramatic change in her circumstances. What had begun as a routine day of administrative tasks had transformed into one of the most challenging assignments of her military career. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders as she prepared to tackle what seemed like an impossible mission timeline. Building 47 stood at the edge of the motor pool, a massive concrete structure that housed the Convoy Operations Center. As Maria approached, she could see dozens of vehicles lined up in precise formations, armored Humvees, supply trucks, and mine-resistant vehicles that would form the backbone of the mission. Soldiers moved with purposeful urgency, checking equipment and loading supplies under the watchful eyes of their squad leaders. Major Chun was waiting for her at the entrance, a tablet computer in his hands, and stress lines etched across his face. He was known throughout the base as one of the most competent operations officers, someone who could coordinate complex missions with remarkable efficiency. His presence on this assignment indicated the critical importance of the operation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, thank God you're here, Major Chun said, extending his hand in greeting. We've got a situation that requires immediate action and creative problem-solving. Maria shook his hand firmly, already mentally preparing for the briefing that would define the next several hours of her life. What's our current status, sir? Major Chun led her into the operations center, where multiple large screens displayed maps, satellite imagery, and real-time intelligence feeds. The room buzzed with activity as intelligence analysts, communications specialists, and logistics coordinators worked frantically to piece together a coherent picture of the tactical situation. Here's what we know, Chun began, pointing to the main display screen. Our primary supply route, Highway 7, has been compromised by IED placement at 3 separate locations. Intelligence indicates that insurgent forces have been tracking our convoy patterns and have prepared an ambush for today's scheduled delivery. The satellite imagery showed the highway stretching across the desert landscape, with red markers indicating the suspected explosive device locations. Maria studied the terrain carefully, noting the elevation changes, natural choke points, and potential alternative routes that might be available. What about Route Alternate Charlie? She asked, referencing one of the backup corridors that had been identified during earlier planning sessions. Also compromised, Chun replied grimly. 2 roadside bomb discoveries this morning, and intelligence suggests additional devices may be in place. The enemy has been studying our contingency plans. Maria felt the weight of the challenge settling over her. Traditional route planning relied on having at least one secure alternate pathway, but the current situation had eliminated the obvious options. Finding a safe passage would require thinking beyond conventional approaches. What's our destination and cargo priority? She asked, focusing on the essential mission parameters. Chun pulled up another screen showing Forward Operating Base Whiskey, a small outpost positioned in a strategically important valley about 60 kilometers from their current location. Medical supplies, ammunition, and food for 100 soldiers. They're currently operating on emergency reserves and can't sustain operations beyond tonight without resupply. The critical nature of the mission became clear immediately. Medical supplies meant life-or-death situations for wounded soldiers, while ammunition shortages could leave the outpost defenseless against enemy attacks. Failure to deliver these materials would put American lives at immediate risk. Available convoy assets? Maria asked, moving to the next critical planning element. 12 vehicles total. Chun responded, highlighting each vehicle type on his tablet. 4 armored Humvees for escort, 6 heavy supply trucks, and 2 mine-resistant vehicles for route clearing. We also have air support available for emergency extraction if the mission goes badly. Maria studied the vehicle composition, calculating load capacities and movement speeds. The mix of vehicles presented both opportunities and challenges. The heavy trucks could carry substantial cargo but were slow and vulnerable, while the armored vehicles provided protection but had limited cargo space. Personnel complement, she continued, building a complete picture of available resources. 42 soldiers total, including drivers, gunners, and security teams, Chun replied. Most have convoy experience, but several are new to this theater of operations. The team leaders are all veterans with multiple deployments. The human element was often the most critical factor in convoy operations. Experienced soldiers could adapt to unexpected situations and make split-second decisions that meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Having veteran team leaders would be crucial for managing the newer personnel under stress. Maria walked to the map display and began studying the terrain between their current position and Forward Operating Base Whiskey. The traditional routes followed established roads and well-mapped corridors, but those were exactly the paths that enemy forces had targeted for ambush operations. "Sir, what if we abandon the road network entirely?" she asked, pointing to areas of open desert between the bases. "Cross-country navigation through sectors that haven't been used for convoy operations." Major Chen frowned as he considered the proposal. "That's extremely risky terrain. No road maintenance, potential for vehicle breakdowns in soft sand, and limited options for air support if we run into trouble. But also unpredictable to enemy forces," Maria countered. "They've been planning ambushes based on our established patterns. Taking a completely unexpected route eliminates their preparation advantage." The concept was bold and dangerous, but it offered the element of surprise that might be crucial for mission success. Maria began sketching potential routes on the digital map, identifying waypoints that would allow for navigation while avoiding known enemy observation positions. "We'd need detailed terrain analysis for vehicle passability," she continued, warming to the idea. "Satellite imagery to identify obstacles, sand composition data to predict vehicle performance, and contingency plans for mechanical failures in remote areas." Chen nodded slowly, beginning to see the potential in her unconventional approach. "The intelligence section can provide terrain analysis, but we're still looking at significant risks. What about navigation challenges?" Maria had already been thinking about navigation solutions. GPS coordination with multiple backup systems. Each vehicle gets programmed waypoints, and we establish communication checkpoints every 10 kilometers. The lead vehicles carry extra navigation equipment in case of electronic warfare attacks. As they discussed the cross-country option, other staff members began gathering around the map display. Word was spreading through the operations center that an unusual mission plan was developing, and experienced officers wanted to contribute their expertise to the planning process. Captain Williams from the intelligence section approached with a thick folder of aerial photographs. "I've been listening to your discussion, and I think we might have some options for cross-country navigation. These photos show terrain conditions from the past week." Maria eagerly examined the photographs, looking for features that would support vehicle movement. The desert appeared deceptively uniform from a distance, but closer examination revealed significant variations in surface hardness, elevation changes, and natural obstacles that could trap or damage vehicles. "This ridge line here," she said, pointing to a series of elevated terrain features, "could provide concealment from enemy observation while offering solid ground for heavy vehicle movement." Captain Williams nodded in agreement. "Geological surveys indicate that area has a rock substrate covered by relatively thin sand. Should support the weight of fully loaded supply trucks without excessive sinking." The plan was beginning to take shape, but significant challenges remained. Fuel consumption would be higher during cross-country movement, requiring careful calculation of range and potential refueling points. Communication would be more difficult without the infrastructure support available along established routes. Most importantly, the convoy would be operating without the security resources that had been positioned along traditional pathways. "What about security coverage?" Major Chen asked, voicing the concern that was occupying everyone's thoughts. Maria had been considering this problem as well. "We modify the convoy formation for all-around security rather than linear protection. Spread the vehicles in a wider pattern to prevent concentrated attacks, and use the mine-resistant vehicles as mobile strong points that can respond to threats from any direction." The concept required departing from standard convoy procedures that emphasize tight formations and coordinated movement. Instead, the vehicles would operate more like an armored patrol, maintaining visual contact while covering more ground and presenting multiple targets rather than a single concentrated threat. "Time factor is still critical," Chen reminded them. "Even with the best route planning, cross-country movement is slower than highway travel. We need to factor additional time into the mission schedule." Maria checked her watch and realized that over an hour had passed since General Harrison had given them the 2-hour deadline. The pressure of time was adding urgency to every decision, but rushing the planning process could lead to fatal mistakes in execution. "We need to make a decision and commit to the plan," she said firmly. "Cross-country route with modified security formation, departure in 45 minutes, and arrival at forward operating base Whiskey before sunset." Major Chin looked around the room at the assembled staff members, gauging their reactions to the proposal. The plan was unconventional and risky, but it offered the best chance of avoiding enemy ambushes while delivering critical supplies to soldiers who desperately needed them. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez will serve as convoy commander for this mission, Chin announced, making the assignment official. She'll ride in the lead vehicle and coordinate all movement and security decisions. The weight of command authority settled on Maria's shoulders immediately. Leading a convoy through hostile territory was one of the most demanding responsibilities in military operations, requiring constant decision-making under pressure while maintaining responsibility for the lives of dozens of soldiers and the success of a critical mission. I'll need detailed briefings from each section before departure, she said, taking charge of the final preparation phase. Intelligence update on enemy activity, communications plan for cross-country operations, vehicle status reports, and emergency procedures for medical situations or mechanical breakdowns. The operations center exploded into focused activity as each section began preparing their specific contributions to the mission. Intelligence analysts worked to identify any recent enemy activity along the proposed route. Communications specialists programmed radio frequencies and backup systems, and maintenance crews conducted final vehicle inspections. Maria found herself at the center of the coordinated effort, making decisions that would affect every aspect of the mission. The transformation from being questioned about her identification to commanding a critical convoy operation had happened so quickly that she barely had time to process the magnitude of the change. As she reviewed the final route map, Maria realized that this mission would either establish her reputation as a leader capable of handling impossible situations or become a cautionary example of the dangers of departing from established procedures. The stakes were high enough that failure was not an acceptable outcome. Convoy personnel, report to vehicle assignments, she announced over the facility's public address system. Departure in 30 minutes. All section leaders report to the operations center for final briefing. The controlled chaos of mission preparation reached its peak as soldiers gathered their equipment and moved toward their assigned vehicles. Maria could see the mixture of confidence and concern in their faces as they prepared for an unusual mission that would test their training and adaptability. Major Chin approached her with a radio handset and tactical map case. Final authority is yours once the convoy moves out, he said seriously. Trust your instincts and remember that those soldiers at Forward Operating Base Whiskey are counting on your leadership. As Maria accepted the radio and map case, she felt the full weight of command responsibility settling over her. In less than an hour, she had gone from administrative paperwork to leading one of the most challenging missions of her career. The identification questioning that had seemed so important earlier in the day now felt like a distant memory compared to the immediate demands of convoy leadership. The sound of vehicle engines beginning to warm up filled the air as the final minutes of preparation ticked away. Maria took a deep breath, knowing that the next several hours would test every skill she had developed during her military career. The mission was about to begin, and there would be no opportunity for second-guessing once the convoy moved out into the hostile desert terrain. The convoy formation moved through the main gate of Forward Operating Base Thunder exactly 30 minutes after Maria's announcement. She rode in the lead armored Humvee, studying the terrain ahead through ballistic glass windows while maintaining radio contact with all vehicle commanders. The weight of 42 lives and mission success pressed heavily on her shoulders as they departed from familiar territory into the unknown challenges of cross-country navigation. Sergeant First Class Martinez served as her driver, a veteran with 3 previous deployments who understood the importance of smooth coordination between convoy commander and vehicle operator. His steady hands on the steering wheel and calm demeanor provided reassurance as they approached the point where their route would diverge from established roads. All vehicles, this is Convoy 1, Maria announced over the radio network. We're approaching Navigation Point Alpha in 2 minutes. Prepare for transition to cross-country movement and implement tactical spacing. The acknowledgments came back from each vehicle commander, confirming their readiness for the challenging phase of the mission. Maria could hear the tension in their voices, but also the professional confidence that came from thorough preparation and clear leadership direction. The landscape ahead stretched endlessly under the blazing afternoon sun, with rocky outcroppings and sand dunes creating a complex pattern of obstacles and opportunities. Satellite imagery had provided general guidance about terrain conditions, but the reality of cross-country navigation would require constant adaptation to unexpected ground conditions. Navigation Point Alpha reached, Martinez announced as they turned away from the paved highway onto a barely visible track that led into the desert interior. Beginning cross-country phase. Maria felt the vehicle's motion change immediately as they left the smooth asphalt for uneven desert terrain. The Humvee's suspension absorbed the impact of rocks and sand ridges, but she could feel the increased stress on both vehicle and passengers as they began the demanding cross-country journey. Behind them, the 12-vehicle convoy spread into the modified formation that Maria had designed for all-around security. Instead of following single file like traditional road convoys, the vehicles maintained visual contact while covering a broader area to prevent concentrated enemy attacks. Vehicle spacing looks good, reported Staff Sergeant Johnson from the trail vehicle. All units maintaining formation and communication. The first hour of cross-country movement proceeded better than Maria had dared to hope. The terrain conditions matched intelligence predictions, providing solid ground for vehicle movement while offering natural concealment from enemy observation positions. The convoy made steady progress toward their first major waypoint, a prominent ridge line that would serve as a navigation reference. However, as they approached the ridge line, Specialist Davis in the communications vehicle reported concerning radio intercepts. Convoy 1, this is communications. We're picking up increased enemy radio traffic in this sector. Pattern suggests they may be aware of vehicle movement in our area. The intelligence was troubling, but not unexpected. Enemy forces maintained observation networks throughout the region, and the movement of 12 military vehicles would be difficult to conceal completely. Maria had planned for this possibility, but hearing confirmation of enemy awareness added urgency to their navigation timing. All vehicles, increase tactical alertness, she directed. Gunners maintain 360-degree observation and report any suspicious activity immediately. The convoy continued toward the ridge line, but Maria noticed changes in the terrain that hadn't been visible in satellite imagery. Recent rainfall had created soft patches where vehicles began sinking into saturated sand, requiring careful route selection to maintain forward progress. Convoy 1. This is Vehicle 7, came the call from one of the heavy supply trucks. We're experiencing traction problems in this soft ground. May need assistance to continue movement. Maria immediately directed the convoy to halt while she assessed the situation. Vehicle breakdowns during cross-country movement were among the most serious challenges facing convoy operations, especially when operating without road-based recovery assets. Martinez, position us where we can observe Vehicle 7. She instructed, as they maneuvered to evaluate the stuck supply truck. The massive vehicle had sunk to its axles in what appeared to be solid ground from a distance. The driver was attempting to rock the truck free using standard recovery techniques, but the weight of medical supplies and ammunition made extraction difficult without additional assistance. Vehicles 3 and 4, positioned for recovery operations. Maria directed the mine-resistant vehicles that carried winching equipment. All other vehicles maintain security positions and watch for enemy activity. The recovery operation began immediately, with experienced soldiers rigging tow cables and coordinating the delicate process of extracting the heavy truck without damaging critical supplies. Maria monitored both the recovery effort and radio communications for signs of enemy forces taking advantage of their temporary halt. 20 minutes into the recovery operation, the situation took a dangerous turn. Corporal Stevens in the rear security vehicle reported dust clouds approaching from the southeast, indicating vehicle movement in their direction. Convoy 1. This is Vehicle 12, Stevens called urgently. Multiple vehicles approaching our position from grid coordinates 472 to 831. Speed and direction suggest hostile intent. Maria felt adrenaline surge through her system as the tactical situation shifted from routine movement to potential combat engagement. The convoy was vulnerable during recovery operations, with limited mobility options and exposure to enemy observation. Vehicle 7 status? She called to the recovery team. 30 seconds to extraction complete, came the reply from the winch operator. All vehicles prepare for immediate movement, Maria announced over the radio network. Security teams establish firing positions and prepare for contact. The approaching dust clouds grew larger and more distinct as enemy vehicles closed the distance to the convoy position. Maria could count at least 3 separate vehicle signatures, suggesting a coordinated attack by insurgent forces who had tracked their movement through the desert terrain. Vehicle 7 extracted and mobile, reported the recovery team just as the first enemy vehicle became visible on the horizon. All vehicles execute immediate displacement, Maria ordered. Maintain formation and prepare for enemy contact while moving. The convoy lurched into motion, with each vehicle commander coordinating movement while maintaining defensive readiness. The mine-resistant vehicles positioned themselves to provide covering fire while the supply trucks accelerated toward better defensive terrain near the ridge line. Enemy vehicles opened fire as the convoy began moving, with automatic weapons creating dust clouds where bullets impacted around the military vehicles. The distinctive sound of incoming rounds striking armored plating reminded every soldier of the deadly seriousness of their situation. Return fire, called out the gunner in Maria's vehicle as he engaged targets with the mounted machine gun. The sound of outgoing rounds mixed with the engine noise and radio communications created a chaotic symphony of combat operations. Maria coordinated the convoy's defensive response while simultaneously directing movement toward better tactical positions. Her training in logistics coordination proved invaluable as she managed multiple vehicles under fire, ensuring that critical supplies remained protected while soldiers engaged enemy forces. Convoy 1, this is air support, came a new voice on the radio frequency. We have 2 Apache helicopters inbound to your position. Estimate arrival in 12 minutes. The promise of air support provided crucial psychological and tactical advantage, but 12 minutes seemed like an eternity during active combat engagement. Maria needed to keep the convoy moving and fighting until reinforcements could arrive to neutralize the enemy threat. Vehicle commanders maintained suppressive fire and continue movement toward the ridge line, she directed. Air support inbound in 12 minutes. The fighting continued as the convoy approached better defensive terrain, with enemy vehicles pursuing while maintaining harassing fire. Several convoy vehicles sustained minor damage from enemy rounds, but the armored protection held against the insurgent weapons being employed. As they reached the base of the ridge line, Maria identified a defensive position that would provide both cover and fields of fire for engaging the pursuing enemy forces. The natural terrain features offered protection while allowing the convoy to establish a coordinated defense. All vehicles established defensive positions using the ridge line for cover, she ordered. Prepare for sustained engagement until air support arrives. The convoy vehicles maneuvered into defensive positions with practiced efficiency, despite the stress of enemy contact and unfamiliar terrain. Each vehicle commander selected positions that maximized their defensive advantages while maintaining mutual support with neighboring vehicles. Enemy forces attempted to close the distance for more effective engagement, but concentrated fire from convoy weapon systems forced them to maintain standoff distance. The superior training and equipment of American forces began to show as the tactical situation stabilized in favor of the convoy. Air support, this is Convoy 1. Maria called on the designated frequency. We are in defensive positions at grid coordinates 485 to 847. Enemy forces approximately 800 meters southeast of our location. 3 vehicles with dismounted personnel. Convoy 1, this is Apache lead. We have visual contact with your position and enemy forces. Commencing attack run in 30 seconds. The sound of approaching helicopters provided welcome relief to the convoy personnel who had been engaged in ground combat for over 20 minutes. Maria watched as the Apache attack helicopters positioned themselves for engagement, their sophisticated weapon systems tracking enemy targets with deadly precision. The helicopter attack was swift and devastating, with precision-guided missiles eliminating enemy vehicles in a series of controlled explosions. Within minutes, the threat to the convoy had been neutralized, and The desert returned to relative quiet except for the sound of military vehicle engines. Convoy 1, this is Apache lead. Enemy forces neutralized. You are clear to continue movement. Maria felt relief flood through her as the immediate danger passed, but she knew the mission was far from complete. The delay caused by enemy engagement had consumed precious time, and forward operating base Whiskey was still hours away across challenging terrain. All vehicles, report status and casualties. She called over the radio network, beginning the process of assessing damage and reorganizing for continued movement. The reports came back with better news than she had hoped. No serious casualties among convoy personnel, minimal vehicle damage that wouldn't prevent continued operation, and all critical supplies intact and secure. Outstanding performance under fire, she announced to all vehicle commanders. Reform convoy and prepare to continue mission. We still have soldiers counting on these supplies. As the convoy reorganized for continued movement, Maria reflected on the intensity of the past hour. The transition from routine logistics to combat leadership had tested every aspect of her training and experience. The successful defense of the convoy validated her unconventional route planning, but significant challenges remained before mission completion. Martinez, let's get moving toward the next waypoint, she said to her driver. We've got supplies to deliver. The convoy resumed movement across the desert landscape, now with the added confidence that came from successfully handling enemy contact. The soldiers had proven their ability to fight effectively under difficult conditions, and Maria's leadership had been tested and validated under the most demanding circumstances possible. However, the sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, and the timeline for reaching forward operating base Whiskey before dark was becoming increasingly tight. The convoy would need to maintain maximum sustainable speed across challenging terrain to complete their mission within the critical time window. As they approached the next major terrain feature, Maria began planning for the final phase of the journey that would bring them to their destination and the completion of one of the most challenging convoy missions of her military career. The final phase of the convoy mission began as shadows lengthened across the desert landscape, and the sun approached the western horizon. Maria checked her watch and calculated the remaining distance to forward operating base Whiskey, realizing that completing the mission before dark would require pushing both vehicles and personnel to their operational limits. All vehicles, this is Convoy 1, she announced over the radio network. We're entering the final approach corridor. Maintain maximum sustainable speed and heightened security awareness. Intelligence reports indicate possible enemy activity in the target area. The convoy had traveled over 40 kilometers of challenging cross-country terrain, survived enemy contact, and overcome multiple mechanical challenges. The soldiers were exhausted, the vehicles were strained, but the critical mission was within reach of completion. Specialist Rodriguez in the navigation vehicle provided updates on their progress toward the final waypoint. Convoy 1. Current position places us 12 kilometers from forward operating base Whiskey. Estimated arrival time based on current speed is 45 minutes. Maria felt the pressure of the approaching deadline intensifying with each passing minute. The soldiers at forward operating base Whiskey were operating on emergency reserves and desperately needed the medical supplies, ammunition, and food that the convoy carried. Failure to arrive before dark would put the outpost at serious risk during nighttime hours when enemy forces were most active. The terrain ahead presented new challenges as they approached the valley where forward operating base Whiskey was located. Steep hillsides and rocky ravines required careful navigation to prevent vehicle damage or entrapment in areas where recovery would be extremely difficult. Driver, what's your assessment of vehicle condition for this final push? Maria asked Sergeant Martinez, knowing that his experience would be crucial for maintaining momentum through the demanding terrain. Vehicles handling well despite the cross-country beating, Martinez replied. Engine temperature is elevated but within acceptable limits. We can maintain current speed for another hour if necessary. Similar reports came in from other vehicle commanders, indicating that the convoy retained sufficient mechanical capability to complete the mission despite the stress of extended cross-country operations. The vehicles had performed better than expected under demanding conditions. As they crested a significant ridgeline, forward operating base Whiskey became visible in the valley below. The small outpost looked vulnerable and isolated, surrounded by defensive barriers and positioned in terrain that provided both strategic advantage and tactical challenges for supply operations. "There's our destination," Maria said with satisfaction, pointing toward the base that represented the culmination of their challenging journey. "Signal the base that we're approaching and request clearance for immediate entry." Communications Specialist Davis established contact with forward operating base Whiskey and relayed their approach status. The response came back immediately, indicating that the base personnel were eager to receive the critical supplies that the convoy carried. "Convoy 1, this is Whiskey Base. We have visual contact with your vehicles and are preparing to receive your convoy immediately upon arrival. Medical personnel are standing by for any casualties or injuries." The final descent into the valley required careful coordination to prevent vehicles from becoming separated or trapped in difficult terrain. Maria directed a modified formation that would allow for mutual support while accommodating the challenging ground conditions. "Vehicle spacing for descent formation," she directed. "Maintain visual contact, but allow for independent navigation around obstacles. Let vehicles scout the route for following vehicles." The convoy began the careful process of navigating down the hillside toward forward operating base Whiskey. The heavy supply trucks required extra caution on the steep terrain, with drivers using engine braking and low gears to maintain control while carrying their precious cargo. Halfway through the descent, Vehicle 9 reported a significant problem. "Convoy 1, this is Vehicle 9. We're experiencing brake fade due to extended use on this descent. May need emergency assistance to reach the bottom safely." The brake problem was exactly the kind of mechanical failure that convoy commanders feared most during critical phases of the mission. Losing control of a heavy supply truck on steep terrain could result in vehicle rollover, cargo loss, and serious injury to personnel. "All vehicles halt immediately," Maria ordered. "Establish emergency positions and prepare for recovery assistance to Vehicle 9. The convoy stopped in place while Maria assessed options for helping the troubled vehicle reach the valley floor safely. The mine-resistant vehicles carried emergency braking equipment, but implementing recovery procedures on steep terrain would be complex and time-consuming. "Vehicle 9, report your current status and emergency brake capability," she called to the truck driver. "Emergency brakes are functional, but may not hold for extended period with this load weight," came the response. "We need to continue moving or risk total brake failure." The situation required immediate decision-making with limited options. Stopping the vehicle risked complete brake failure that would make continued movement impossible. Continuing movement risked loss of control and potential catastrophic accident. Vehicles 3 and 4 establish recovery positions ahead of Vehicle 9, Maria decided. "Prepare to provide emergency stopping assistance using winch cables if necessary." The recovery vehicles maneuvered into positions where they could deploy emergency braking assistance if Vehicle 9 lost control during the continued descent. It was a risky procedure that required precise coordination between multiple vehicle crews. "Vehicle 9, continue descent at minimum safe speed," Maria directed. "Recovery vehicles are positioned to assist if you experience control problems." The tense descent continued with Vehicle 9 carefully managing its failing brakes while recovery vehicles maintained readiness to provide emergency assistance. Every soldier in the convoy watched as the heavy truck navigated the dangerous terrain with decreasing braking capability. 15 minutes of careful maneuvering brought Vehicle 9 safely to level ground at the valley floor, where the emergency brake systems finally engaged successfully to stop the vehicle without incident. The collective sigh of relief was almost audible across the radio network. "Outstanding driving under pressure," Maria commended the Vehicle 9 crew. All vehicles resumed formation for final approach to forward operating base Whiskey. The convoy reformed and completed the final kilometer to the base entrance without additional complications. As they approached the main gate, Maria felt a profound sense of accomplishment at having successfully completed one of the most challenging convoy missions of her military career. "Forward operating base Whiskey, this is Convoy 1 requesting immediate entry for critical supply delivery," she called on the base frequency. "Convoy 1, you are cleared for immediate entry." Proceed directly to the supply depot for cargo offloading. Medical personnel are standing by. The main gate of Forward Operating Base Whiskey opened to welcome the convoy that had traveled through hostile territory to deliver desperately needed supplies. Soldiers from the base lined the route, applauding the arrival of the convoy that represented their lifeline to continued operations. As the convoy vehicles rolled through the gate, Maria saw the relief and gratitude in the faces of soldiers who had been waiting for the critical supplies. Medical personnel immediately began directing the unloading of medical supplies that would enable continued treatment of wounded soldiers. Major Thompson, the base commander, approached Maria's vehicle as it came to a stop in the supply depot area. His expression showed the strain of operating with emergency reserves, but also the relief of receiving the critical resupply that his outpost required. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, outstanding mission execution, Major Thompson said as Maria exited her vehicle. Your convoy arrived exactly when we needed it most. These supplies will enable us to continue operations for several more weeks. Maria felt the satisfaction of mission accomplishment as she surveyed the organized chaos of supply unloading. Soldiers worked efficiently to transfer medical supplies, ammunition, and food from convoy vehicles to base storage areas where they would be immediately available for distribution. What's the current tactical situation here? She asked Major Thompson, knowing that understanding local conditions would be important for planning the convoy's return journey. Enemy activity has increased significantly over the past week, Thompson replied. Intelligence suggests they were attempting to cut our supply line by timing attacks on convoy operations. Your alternative route completely avoided their prepared ambush positions. The confirmation that her cross-country route planning had successfully avoided enemy ambushes provided validation for the unconventional approach that had seemed so risky during the planning phase. The decision to abandon established roads had proven crucial for mission success. As the supply transfer neared completion, Maria began coordinating with Major Thompson about overnight accommodation for convoy personnel. The return journey would require fresh vehicles and rested soldiers to maintain security through potentially hostile territory. We can provide secure quarters for your convoy personnel tonight, Thompson offered. Vehicle maintenance facilities are available for any repairs needed before your return journey. That would be greatly appreciated, Maria replied. Some vehicles need minor maintenance after the cross-country movement, and the soldiers could use rest before the return trip. The sun had set completely by the time the supply transfer was completed, but the mission had achieved its primary objective of delivering critical supplies before darkness made the outpost vulnerable to enemy attacks. Forward Operating Base Whiskey was now resupplied and capable of sustained operations. That evening, as convoy personnel gathered for a meal in the base dining facility, Maria reflected on the extraordinary events of the past day. She had begun the morning processing routine paperwork and faced questioning about her military identification. By nightfall, she was being congratulated for successfully leading a critical convoy mission through hostile territory. The transformation from administrative duties to convoy leadership had happened so quickly that she barely had time to process the magnitude of the change. The confidence that came from successful mission completion under challenging conditions would stay with her throughout the remainder of her military career. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called Lieutenant Colonel Williams as he approached her table in the dining facility. General Harrison has requested a full mission debrief when you return to Forward Operating Base Thunder tomorrow. Your innovative approach to convoy operations has attracted attention at the highest levels. The prospect of briefing senior leadership about the mission brought both pride and nervous anticipation. Maria knew that successful completion of such a challenging assignment would enhance her reputation and potentially lead to additional leadership opportunities. As she prepared for sleep in the temporary quarters provided by Forward Operating Base Whiskey, Maria thought about the soldiers who had trusted her leadership during the dangerous convoy mission. Their professional competence and courage under fire had made mission success possible, validating the trust that had been placed in her judgment. The return journey the next morning would present new challenges, but the successful completion of the delivery mission had proven that unconventional approaches could succeed when traditional methods were compromised. Maria had earned her place among the convoy commanders who could handle impossible situations. The identification questioning that had seemed so problematic at the beginning of the day now felt like a distant memory compared to the significance of leading soldiers through combat operations. General Harrison's decision to assign her to Convoy Command had proven correct, validating her reputation for solving complex logistics problems under pressure. As sleep finally came in the secure quarters of Forward Operating Base Whiskey, Maria knew that this mission would be remembered as a defining moment in her military career. The transition from questioned identification to successful convoy leadership represented the kind of rapid adaptation that defined professional soldiers in combat environments. The convoy mission was complete, the supplies had been delivered, and the soldiers who had trusted her leadership were safe. For a logistics coordinator who had dedicated her career to ensuring that critical supplies reached the soldiers who needed them, there could be no greater measure of success than the gratitude of those soldiers and the completion of an impossible mission.